There was a moment when I almost didn't make it. I sat alone in the dark, pistol in hand. I had fallen apart, and the worst part was, no one knew. Because people like us, we don't know how to stop. We don't know how to pause. We don't know how to take a knee unless we're injured, and even then we fight to get back up. But what happens when the injury is invisible? When the weight becomes too much? That moment nearly cost me everything. My family, my mission, and my life. My name is Doug White. I'm a retired law enforcement officer and a veteran. And for more than 30 years, I wore 2 uniforms, but I had one mission: to serve something greater than myself. During my career, I drove myself harder and faster than my peers, setting a bar only a few could match, until finally the weight of it all caught me. My break came in the darkness. But with grit, hard work, and the right people in my corner, my break became my breakthrough. And now, I tell this story so you can tell yours. Welcome to Tell This Story, the podcast for veterans, first responders, and those who love us. Here we dive into the unspoken truths, the hard-earned lessons, and the path forward. This isn't about surviving your story, it's about becoming the person you were always meant to be. Because I believe resilience is good, but growth is better. And if no one's told you this yet, it's okay to be okay. You deserve to live, you deserve to grow, and you deserve to be stronger than before. This podcast was inspired by my book, Hiding in Plain Sight: The Truth About Trauma, Service, and the Way Forward. If you haven't read it yet, grab your copy wherever books are sold, or visit DougWhiteOfficial.com. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Polestar Coffee, veteran-owned, roasted with purpose, and delivered to your door. Fuel your mission at PolestarCoffee.com and use code THISSTORY at checkout for 10% off. Today's guest is on the front lines of a battle most people never see, but its impact is undeniable. I'm talking about moral injury, unseen trauma, and the silent toll of remote warfare. Tanner Yackley is the founder and CEO of Remote Warrior LLC, and he's made it his mission to stand in the gap for drone operators or remote combat veterans. From developing the RECON trauma screen to training VA providers and pushing for policy reform, Tanner is leading a movement, one that challenges the stigma, amplifies the unseen, and equips our warriors to truly come home. This isn't just a conversation about trauma, it's a blueprint for healing, advocacy, and change. Stick around as we go deep with Tanner Yackley. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Tell This Story. This is unscripted and this is unplanned. In fact, I think 27 minutes ago, I jumped on a Zoom call with Tanner based on a LinkedIn message that he sent me last week saying, "Hey man, this is who I am and what I'm looking to do. Kinda, you want to talk?" And I was like, "Yeah, bro, whatever." And then we started talking, and I didn't know if I wanted to throw my chair through a wall or if I wanted to stand up and say yes, 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 or call friends, or man, I don't know. It's been a long time since I felt the absolute need to get on right now. So we killed the Zoom call and jumped on Riverside, and I want to get this. I don't want questions and answers. I just want the conversation we were having. So everybody, welcome Tanner Yackley to Tell This Story. I'm not even going to give the intro. I'm going to let you tell us who you are and what you're doing, bro, because it's incredible, man. It just blew my mind. So
Absolutely.
Give it to us, brother.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. And I love the passion to drive behind this. And this is exactly, who I love working with, is people that are passionate with it. So Tanner Yackley, I was on the MQ-9 Reaper, the big one you see in all the movies. It's not the little guy, everyone says drones and everything else, and they think of the little quads buzzing around, especially with everything going on, overseas right now. But this was the big one, 66-foot wingspan, 21 foot in length there. And it's a beautiful bird there, and I had the pleasure of operating on it for over a decade. I operated 8 years with the U.S. Air Force. I flew over 1,000 combat missions in under 3 years. I amassed just shy of 2,900 hours in that time as well. And I left the career field with just under 3,400 hours. So when you do the math with that, it gets real weird because I was mainly training afterwards and standing up programs, etc. There, the biggest thing is, and why we're here talking about this, is just the misconceptions with this community and this platform. We're like you and I were just talking about a couple minutes ago. It's everybody looks at it and says, "Man, it's just a video game. You're in a cushy seat, hanging out. What's the big deal?" And that couldn't be farther from the truth. And these guys are are making life or death decisions every single day. They're dealing with things like moral injury, disassociation, many areas there that, even myself, I personally struggle with it. And, it's a strain of PTSD, if you will. It's called complex PTSD that a lot of guys walk out with because it's that repeated exposure over and over and over again to death, destruction, and everything else with it. And half the time it wasn't even what our weapons were doing to people; it was what the locals were doing to each other. And because it was barbaric, it really was. And so you're sitting there having to watch all these decisions, and it's not just the operators that are physically at the controls; it's the intel people that are also processing the imagery. It's the people that are making the calls, right? And unfortunately, not everything goes perfect. It's war, with it. And so then all they do at the end is just let you out of the box and say, go home. And so we didn't have anything, especially back then in the heyday of it all, because early teams was they were wanting more. Every ground commander wanted a Reaper above it. Every soft team, everything else wanted a Reaper and support with it, because we were good at what we did, there. So, and it's hard because you've got so many issues with it, and I'm sure we'll dive into it here, but just that stem from it all, and that's why now I'm working on a doctorate in psychology to help establish and help fix this, because there's so much lack of understanding and people are dying because of it. Unfortunately, there's a mass amount that are joining the 22 a day, because that's the only way to make it stop with it. And I told you, I deal with what feels like an ice pick in my chest 24/7. That feeling never goes away with it, and I've dealt with it for 7 years, and I'm probably longer. It's just that back and then, we were so institutionalized to believe that what we did didn't matter. What we did was just a video game, and everything else. And that mantra is still out there, unfortunately. And it's getting people killed, at the end of the day with it, because these guys are some of the most talented and quick decision makers that could ever be out there, period, across the board. And so to be able to go in and tell someone that, oh, you didn't deploy, so how can you have trauma, is one of the most insulting things ever to this group of individuals, because they're struggling really bad with it.
Well, my problem with that is if you didn't deploy, you've said yourself that you didn't consider yourself a combat vet because that's what you had been told.
Yeah.
1,000+ combat missions. I don't think there's a lot of people that can stand in that circle. 3,000 hours in combat, flying overhead. And you said that most of the stuff you were on was HVT. And I think a lot of our listeners understand what the intelligence cycle is, what OSINT is, HUMINT, and all that other stuff. They understand that. But you said something that, and they understand that, and they understand all the things that go into, and of course there's a team that has to go in afterwards and do exploitation to make sure that you hit what you were supposed to hit. But you said something when I described, my understanding, when I told you the story of my buddy who did that. I described the intelligence cycle, and you referred to it as the kill chain. And that being in your position, you also had to understand and follow what you called and referred to as the patterns of life. So the people that you were going to Control Alt Delete, you knew what they had for breakfast.
Absolutely.
You knew what they did during the day when they dropped their kids off at school, everything that they did, when they brushed their teeth, when they left, how they left, the times, the varying times, and you bracket them like a target. It's almost like going after an elk. I know where they feed. I know how to get to them. And I just know that between 9 and 9:05 on Wednesdays, they're going to walk through this meadow. And all I have to do is be here and awake.
Exactly.
That's fine and dandy, and that's rock and roll as shit if you are an elk hunter. But when you're a hunter of human beings and you refer to your job in a checklist as a kill chain, that is a level of disassociation, and that is a level of compartmentalization that I don't think a lot of people understand or have had to process. And as you said, back in the heyday in the 2010s, everybody wanted a Reaper. I mean, all the movies you saw from 2010 on was a drone overhead. Yeah. Where's the Reaper? I mean, it was Hollywood famous, but nobody ever saw the operator. And, you said there was nothing there because they discounted you as, oh, you're not in harm's way. You get to go home every day. But what do you say to the airman or the NCO or the young enlisted officer that goes home to an empty barracks or an empty dorm or an empty apartment? And you described to me, and I'd love for you to describe to our listeners, what were the coping mechanisms or the coping things after you left work? I mean, we discussed on killing with Grossman, and in the world of Reaper and drones, UAVs, you get high scores in video games. You hit your target, it's a high score, it's an endorphin. You get the oxytocin, it's the good hug, the good job, the high five. Then you walk out into the hot, either Nevada or New Mexico sun, and what do you go do then?
Exactly. And that's, and that was, especially back then, there was just no, what was it? It was the typical, military coping of, oh, well, let's go drink it away. And let's, if it was, hey, we're going to, we had a strike, and we sit there, and the one piece of this that I don't think a lot of people realize is it's not like, other aircraft where you go in, drop a bomb, dip out, and go, all right, I'm done, right, with the mission. We would sit there and plan exactly like you're saying. And so you knew every piece and every aspect to this. And so even if it wasn't your team, if it wasn't, your shift that took a strike, if you were the one sitting there watching them for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years on end, you felt a moral piece to that. You had ownership over that target. And just like Dave Grossman's book, there's a reason they call them targets, right? You take the human out of the aspect to it, for it. And because of that, what was it? Oh, it was go to the bar and drink it away, and then go home, go to sleep, and then turn around, wake up, and do it all over again. And then you touched on the piece there with, what about the person that, and I was in this boat, I was single at the time, and just go home and I'd play video games and for real. And, and then that was kind of a deep way to decompress and kind of get lost and forget about it at the time. And there was a lot of people that did that. And so it made it more difficult because you didn't have, these structured ways to cope with it after the fact. And especially, I mean, it's not like, we're sitting here talking 4-6 deployments, and in no way am I downplaying that at all. But we were in sustained combat for years on end. And here's the other piece that people don't realize about this. We didn't have training vols. Our training vols were on target half the time. So there was no separation. It wasn't like I get to go home, do some training for 6 months, and then come back out and be back in the fight. This was I might sit in the box, we called it, for 6, 7, 8 hours, or sometimes 12, with it. And an hour of that I cut out and go do a training mission. For me, I was a combat instructor, so I'd have to cut out, go prep a board, present, get a lesson plan built, throw it up, get the guy through training, debrief him really quickly, and then bounce right back into the seat and go right back into combat mode within minutes. With it half the time, I'd go, hey, dude, we'll debrief after shift because I don't have time, because we're so min-manned, at the time that we couldn't fulfill, the training time. So that's why we spent a ton of time, and that's why we racked up the insane amount of hours that we did. And unfortunately back then they didn't do anything about it. They just wavered, stuff left and right, and people were flying way longer than they should have been, with it. And it's still, I'm sure that's still, while things have changed a lot in that community, the still underlying cause is still there. With it, and it's still an absolute problem within it. And now, while yes, we've looked at the active duty side of things with a handful of studies with Wayne Chappelle in 2014, 2019, and 2023, no one's looking at the veterans with it. And so, that's really what I'm trying to help fill the gap with, is being able to create things to help these people, because that's when it hits people. That's when it hit me, was when I stepped away, took the uniform off, and I got out and picked my head up and went, holy shit, I can't even walk out the door now without feeling like that stake's driven in my chest. And I don't know why. That's because my sympathetic nervous system is on fire. 24/7 with it. And so, that's the difficult part, is then you want to talk about, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Try having a bastardized mix of all four that hit you. You feel like you're just getting the shit kicked out of you with it, and just taking punches, because you're going, okay, now I'm overstimulated. Now I have no motivation. Now I don't want to get out of bed. And all those things. So it just makes for, and I've said this a handful of times, especially with how we we were handled back then was just a melting pot of bad decisions. So when it came down to it, because they just looked at us as disposable and still do. And that's why the stigmas exist and everything else with it. And it's just these people are, unfortunately, we just lost a veteran a couple weeks ago. That was an instructor. And for respect of everything, I won't say any more details on that. But it's just it's a real thing. And I had a person on my team that we lost in the middle, while I was flying combat, and we've lost so many others. I've lost count at this point with it, because people don't understand what's going on in their own head, and then to turn around and let them out of the box and go, all right, go be free.
And be dismissive about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a couple of things, a few threads I want to pull on there.
Yeah.
And I should have been feverishly writing down notes like during our Zoom call, because there's so much there. I've found out lately in what I'm doing in not so much the veteran, but the first responder space, because that's where the lack is. And I'm finding that it's not, because of the veteran community and the DoD, they're driving, for the most part, the changes in mental health, CTE, TBI, all of the things. They are a good decade ahead of where we are in the first responder world. But PTS is talked about so much, and now complex PTS is talked about even more. TBI, CTE, all of these things are being talked about and are so normalized that it's almost dinner table conversation. However, it's the cultural differences, not the culture at large, the public, but it's within our own organizations and our own disciplines where they're like, it's not okay not to be okay. You're not supposed to have a problem. You didn't have the requisite number of deployments. You didn't get shot at. You haven't pulled X number of babies out of a pool. You haven't been to a structural collapse where the whole family has died. Everybody wants to put this thing on there because you can't have a problem. I did this and I don't have a problem with it. Okay, well, your coping skills may be different. You may not have had any ACEs, growing up. You may have been in your position sitting in a cushy chair for the last 25 of your 28-year career. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to that. And I also want to point out that you said nobody's looking at the veteran community. Well, when we were on our Zoom call, you and I said, but when do we need it? How many veterans are dying by suicide when they become veterans? It's got to outweigh the active duty.
Absolutely.
And I know that first responder deaths by suicide outnumber and have outnumbered line of duty deaths year in and year out for at least the last decade that I've looked back. And that's considering that even in the veteran world and the first responder world, that not all of these law enforcement agencies are investigating this stuff like, oh, he just drank himself to death. That's a suicide, bro. That was a single vehicle crash. Now, this guy was a driving instructor for 20 years. How did he hit a tree on a straight road? Oh, tire blew out. No, it didn't. It blew out after the crash. So a lot of that stuff is being completely underreported or not captured at all. So the 22 a day is more than that.
Absolutely.
140 a year that we see on the law enforcement and the first responder side, I would say is 4 times that. So people aren't looking at that. I think that at some point or at some level, they're complicit.
Yes.
It is an issue. They should be listening to conversations like this. Anybody who is not sat in the box and taken human life remotely or even up close and personal, I don't see where they have any standing to say that you shouldn't have a problem.
Absolutely.
I think that's dismissive, and it's shitty. It's that kind of silence, and it's that kind of cultural stigma that is handing bullets, that is filling up whiskey glasses, that is responsible for the woes that we feel. So now that I'm done rambling, what is it that you're trying to do with Remote Warrior?
Absolutely. So
this is exciting.
Yes. So I told you earlier, I woke up 2 months ago and I woke up in a just fever dream, and I was like, I need to change this, because I was just so sick of, I had just gotten off a call about a week and a half prior with one of my best friends that he was going to a treatment program because he finally got the courage enough to go do it and get help with it, because he's been struggling really bad with it all. And so, it was looking at that and going, okay, yes, there's programs out there, and thank thank goodness they are. And I'm so, grateful for them, with being able to provide some of these, I don't want to say non-traditional therapies, equine, things like that, that are absolutely beneficial. But it's just trying to narrow this down and get the scope. And so just like we're talking about, right, the one piece of this is education. So being able to bring in my experiences with being, serving a decade on this platform. And then I spent some time in academia teaching as a professor, and then quit that when I said, I want to do this better. And I want to be able to push what I want to pursue here. So I started Remote Warrior, and our flagship piece to this is the Fog of War guide with it. And it breaks it down. And, a lot of the traditional, I don't want to say traditional, but a lot of the common symptoms that remote warriors face there, and putting it into terms that are easy to digest and not all this clinical jargon that you get with, any other system, because, and then you get frustrated with, because again, we were so checklist heavy, and how we operated it in such, it was, it's like a surgeon, I did a lot of studying in my undergrad with the comparison, between, air crew and surgeons. And it's like, they both have checklists, they both have procedures, they both have very, very sterile, literal and figuratively environments there that they walk through. And so being able to provide a document that can make things feel okay for these operators was my primary goal with this. And now it's just blown up into, I want to come in and help, these areas identify the gaps that they have, whether it's the VA, whether it's industry, whether it's professional military education, Guard and Reserve units. We're in the process of developing training programs for all of it to cover these gaps and go, listen, yes, we've moved in the right direction, and I'm so thankful, especially in the last 5 years, how much we're talking more about mental health as a society, but there's still a long way to go for this community, because unfortunately I have talks and meetings daily and have to literally almost go head to head with people trying to defend why this is a problem, and that, these people are dying because of it. And I ran a survey of over 200 people in 96 hours, and over 80% of them will not go get help because of fear of lack of understanding with it. So when stuff like that populates, there's a major issue here with it. And so we're trying to come in and be able to bring these guides, bring this information to the warriors that need them. We've had a lot of really great people come in and help us with funding the printing of a lot of these. So being able to get these out there, we're always looking for, groups to sponsor the printing and stuff like that, because these guides aren't cheap, because they can't be, right? I can't give a remote combat warrior a flimsy piece of paper and say, hey, here you go. They're going to chuck that thing in the trash instantly.
Yeah, in a heartbeat. It needs to feel like a checklist, the spiral bound deal.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what we've built with it too. As I have one that sits right here on my desk, spiral bound J-Fire, looking, kind of thing, and nice and thin, easy reading, light, there to be able to not, because that's the one thing is our nervous system is so on the fritz, 24/7, that it's hard for focus. It's hard to, do those types of things. So, when you walk in and do, let's take cognitive processing therapy. I remember when I went to go do that, they slapped a freaking book on the desk that was about that thick. And I went, hell no. I was just like, no way. Like I just instantly was going, I ain't doing this. Like, I'm like, that is no. So it's
they did the same thing with me with that.
Exactly.
I was lucky because actually I was a chicken. So full disclosure, I didn't want to do it by myself. I needed my security blanket, my wife, Michelle. So we did conjoint CPT. And so she was there with me. And I felt like an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does this mean? What do you mean reframe this?
Yeah.
Like, wait a second. At the time, I was working on a master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
I was in an honor society, for God's sakes.
Mm-hmm.
I was, tactically master of my shit, but I had to read the same paragraph 5 or 6 times to try to figure out and remember what it was that it said to me.
Exactly.
And were it not for Michelle being there to explain it in smaller terms to me, cognitive ability goes out the window. And I wanted to circle back on that, because no good military podcast is complete without a circle back or a piggyback from what the boss said. But to circle back on that, how in the hell are you working on a PhD in psychology with all of the gremlins running around inside your skull? I mean, that's remarkable in itself. That's dedication to this mission.
Absolutely.
Because that can't be easy.
No, I mean, it's not, I've dealt with a lot of struggles with it, and, it hasn't been clean. It's been, I've had classes that have absolutely challenged. I've had classes I've had to drop and retake and things like that, because there's days where, I have a hard enough time getting up and putting my feet on the ground because this little bastard in here, like I said, the gremlins in your head go, you're not good enough today. You don't fucking got it. And it's like, and that's the shit that I have to sit there and push, out of my head every single day. Is every single decision I make, I am overly critical on, because again, all we did was plan for contingencies. All we did was plan for worst case. That is every single day of our lives when we're running combat missions, was what is the absolute worst case scenario that can happen here? Like any good aviator does, right? You always have your contingency plan at the end of that brief, right? That you cup and go, all right, let's talk about the contingencies for the day, and how we're going to handle them if they pop up. And so now my brain, inadvertently turns around and goes, well, you're going out the door to go buy milk. Let's think about everything that could go wrong with that process. And I'm going, ugh. And so it's a struggle. But at the same time, I also recognize that it's going to take somebody that understands this, that sat in the box, that flew the missions, that hacked the mission, that gets it, to truly drive this mission forward. Hopefully, educate the public, educate people that this is a horrendous issue, that these people aren't just joystick warriors and joystick jockeys and all the crap I've heard over the last 15 years with it, and that this is a real thing that's affecting them. And it bleeds over because it's that echelon of getting ramped up, sitting there with a finger on a trigger for 6, 7, 12 hours, waiting for the words clear to engage to come over the radio to employ a weapon and take a life. And then an hour later, I'm going home and buying milk. Nobody else does that. Not a single person.
I hate to give this movie credit because I'd like the movie for the action. I didn't like the movie for the tactical inaccuracies, but The Hurt Locker.
Yeah.
The Hurt Locker is the perfect example of that. And Jeremy Renner's character redeploys, go back home, and he's in the grocery store. 24 hours later, he's working on IEDs. And then he's thinking to himself, what the fuck am I doing in this grocery store? This is not where I belong. This is normal people stuff. They didn't have the milk I wanted. The world is going to end. Champ, ain't nobody dying in the grocery store today.
Yeah.
But for you, your brain is wired. I still, you talked about the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. For 25, 30 years, I was stuck in fight. My default was aggression. So everything I had was fight. And, I can only imagine the repeated exposure. I want to point something out too, and I know I'm jumping all over the place, but for anybody who says that you're not a combat veteran, 1,000+ combat missions, right? Let me ask you, did you get a bonus or did you get paid for coming back with ordnance? So chances are you came back, each one of those 1,000+ missions, light ordnance. Yeah. Did you safely drop those into the ocean someplace or on a bed of feather pillows? Exactly. Exactly. So if you do the math, I mean, without getting into, I guess, the specs of the platform, what was the most common ordnance you guys would drop?
Yeah, AGM 114, multiple different variants of that, but your standard.
How many pounds of bang are in that particular piece of ordnance?
It's 110 pounds of explosives in that weapon.
Usually RDX or something very, very high test.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow. That's 50+ demo blocks of C4.
And then the bombs are even worse. That's a 500 or 1,000 pound bomb that we could do, but the Hellfire was our weapon of choice. Always for it. So
it's a hell of a show, man.
Absolutely. And like we talked about earlier, it's like it's not always, that piece to it. It was sitting around and watching things unfold and, watching the locals, if there was all of a sudden two, echelons of groups of people that are conflicting and things like that. And then some really horrible things happen. I mean, if you can think about what a human can do to another one, I've seen it through a camera and it didn't make it any less real. At the end of the day.
Yeah. It doesn't. It doesn't. Anybody who thinks that has never seen it or had to witness any of that stuff.
Absolutely.
Buddy, I got to tell you, man, they say never meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed. Whoever said that's bullshit. I am so glad to have met you today. I'm so glad that you reached out. And I know you have to run, and I hate like hell to even cut this short, but I want to save something for Thad King and Tyler Huckett, my great friends over at Alone and Unafraid.
Yes.
And I did not jump on this because I wanted to scoop them.
Yeah.
Fuck those guys. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Actually, tomorrow night, I'm going to be on with them to talk about our Scotland trip. And I'm great friends with those guys, great supporters of mine and vice versa.
Absolutely.
And in fact, Tyler is the owner and creator of Polestar Coffee, which is one of the sponsors of our show. It's fantastic coffee. But yeah, enough about that, man. I want to spend more time with you and learn more about what we can do to tell this story to support that. I think Remote Warrior, I think what you're doing, I think your journey is all incredible, man. And I also want to point out to anybody listening here, Tanner's not the only guy. This is not his story. This is all of their story. It's just like, what I'm doing here on this platform.
Mm-hmm.
We're not alone. We've never been alone. There's people out there looking for Tanner Yackley right now to say, hey man, I've got all these ideas. I don't know how to put it together. And he's like, brother, I did. It's called Remote Warrior.
Yeah.
Get on board. So I love what you're doing, man. Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, remotewarriorllc.com, is got a lot of our forums and things like that on there. And then right now we're on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. They're under Remote Warrior LLC there, and then info at remotewarriorllc.com as well. If anyone needs to get in contact, anything like that, and we're always looking to be able to elevate this and push this forward. We're attending different PTSD conferences and things like that, just trying to educate the general public and doing things exactly like this in these conversations to really bolster this, because there's so many people that they feel like they are alone, and then they feel like that at the end of the day that nobody gets it, and that's the sick part of this disease with post-traumatic stress is it makes you feel so isolated, and I've been there, and it's ruined marriages and things like that for me, but at the end of the day it made me more resilient, and it gave me more drive to hopefully provide a lifeline to people that are struggling horribly, and just because they're not missing a leg or in a wheelchair or things like that doesn't mean it doesn't take its toll there. And so being able to elevate that is extremely important and provide support to these warriors.
I love that, man. I've been saying that it's not just about the story; it's about the growth. People want to see the win.
Absolutely,
and you're doing it, brother.
Absolutely.
This is the work, and I love every bit of this. I'm not even going to ask for any parting thoughts or anything, because I don't think you could have summed it up better than you already have.
Yeah,
folks. RemoteWarriorLLC.com. Actually, one last question.
Yes.
A piggyback.
Yes.
Got to close out with the piggyback.
Of course.
The forms that you talked about, the guide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think one of the things that we can do when we go speak to our counselors, our licensed mental health clinicians and all that stuff, and even the VA, is there anywhere we can get a copy of this stuff to take to them for a reference? Like, hey, here's how you treat me.
Absolutely. I'll give you a link we have a resource hub that has a downloadable link to the guide directly on it. And then also gives you all of our socials, everything else with it, because it's not just this one guide. We actually have 10 different ones in our resource library for transition, for looking at things like, family guides, spouse guides, so if someone has, a husband, a wife, whoever is suffering with this, we have ways forward for them. And it's not anything rocket science per se. It's just trying to take the entire thing and help every single person that this touches, because there's so many more that are affected by it than just the operators themselves.
Brother, you're saying all the words that I love. All the words that I love, man. It's fantastic. Buddy, it has been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Feel free to call on me. I will make sure to put all the links in the show notes.
Perfect.
And with that, everyone, there's no way to make this episode better. Thank you for tuning in to Tell the Story.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you for listening to Tell the Story. Tanner Yackley's on a mission, and he's just getting started. If you've ever questioned what it means to serve from a distance or what happens when the war follows you home, this conversation is your answer. Tanner is challenging the system, writing the playbook on veteran care, and giving a voice to the silent warriors behind the screens. If this message resonated with you, share it, support it, and most importantly, talk about it. To learn more about Remote Warrior LLC, the RECON trauma screen, and how you can get involved, go to remotewarriorllc.com. Find Tanner Yackley on LinkedIn and check out the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. For more stories, tools, and resources, check out my book, Hiding in Plain Sight, The Truth About Trauma, Service, and the Way Forward. Or visit my website at dougwhiteofficial.com. Remember, we're stronger than before, together.